Hello everyone, I am Dark Files, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like and subscribe. Also, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. Now sit back and relax. Let's begin. The house had been empty for nearly a year before I moved in. It wasn't anything special, just an old two-story home with weathered shutters and a sagging porch, nestled on the outskirts of a quiet town. The kind of place that had history. The realtor had been upfront with me about that. The previous owner left suddenly, she'd said, tapping manicured nails against her clipboard. No real reason given, just packed up and disappeared one night. That should have been a red flag, but at the time, I didn't care. The price was too good to pass up, and I needed a fresh start. So I signed the papers, packed my things, and within a week, I was settling into my new home. For the first few weeks, things were fine. The house creaked at night, but that was normal. It was old after all. I heard the wind whistling through the eaves, branches scraping against the windows. It all blended into the kind of background noise you expect in a house like this. But then, the little things started happening. I'd wake up to find kitchen cabinets open when I knew I had closed them. My car keys, always left on the entryway table, would turn up in the living room. At first, I blamed myself. I was tired, maybe just forgetful. Then came the noises. They started as soft, almost imperceptible sounds. A faint creak above me as I lay in bed. A whisper of movement in the attic when the house was supposed to be still. I tried to brush it off. The house is settling, I told myself. Wood expands, it contracts, it makes noise. That's just how old houses are. But it got worse. One night, as I sat on the couch watching TV, I heard something, a definite, deliberate sound. A footstep, not the kind of random creak an old house makes. This was different, rhythmic, measured. Someone or something was moving above me. I muted the television, straining my ears. The footsteps continued, slow and purposeful, across the attic floor, back and forth, back and forth. My pulse quickened. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, aiming it at the ceiling as if that would somehow let me see through the wood. The pacing stopped. Silence stretched thick and heavy. My breath caught in my throat. Then, in the dead quiet of the house, I heard it. A single knock.
It came from directly above me.
My stomach twisted into knots. I was alone. I was supposed to be alone. For the next hour, I sat frozen in place, barely breathing. I wanted to convince myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, something was up there. The next morning, I made up my mind. I was going to check the attic. I had never been up there before. The entrance was a simple pull-down ladder in the hallway outside my bedroom. The previous owner had left it completely empty, or so I'd been told. I hesitated at the base of the ladder, gripping the rope with sweaty fingers. My heart pounded as I gave it a sharp tug. The hatch creaked open. A stale, dusty smell rushed down to meet me. The air was thick, heavy. I climbed up slowly, flashlight in hand, the wooden steps groaning under my weight. The attic was small, with wooden beams crisscrossing overhead. My beam of light swept across the space, illuminating dust particles swirling in the air. At first glance, nothing seemed out of place. Just insulation, a few cobwebs, and exposed beams. Then I saw them. Footprints, in the thick layer of dust covering the attic floor. There were clear, fresh footprints, bare footprints. They led from the attic entrance to the farthest, darkest corner. I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening around the flashlight. Slowly, I followed the trail, my breath shallow and unsteady. The footprints stopped abruptly at the wall. I swept my light around. There was nothing there. No door, no opening, just a solid wooden wall. But then, my beam flickered. Just for a second, and in that second, I saw it. A shape, a shadow. It wasn't scurrying like a rat. It was pulling back, retreating, like it knew I had seen it. I bolted. I scrambled down the ladder, slamming the attic hatch shut so hard the walls rattled. My hands were shaking as I shoved a chair under the latch, my breath coming in ragged gasps. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on my bed, watching the attic door, waiting, listening. At some point, exhaustion must have won, because I woke up to the sound of something moving. The chair. It was scraping against the floor, being pushed aside. I shot up, heart hammering against my ribs. My bedroom door was closed, but I could hear it. Soft, deliberate footsteps in the hall. It was out. I didn't think. I grabbed my keys, bolted from my room, and ran. I didn't even stop to grab my shoes. I drove to a motel on the other side of town and checked in for the night. I didn't care how much it cost. I just needed to be anywhere but there. The next morning, I called a moving company. I didn't go back inside. I let them pack my things while I stood outside, watching. I sold the house within a month. A few weeks ago, curiosity got the better of me. I looked up the address online, wondering if anyone had bought it. It was listed again, for sale. The description was eerily familiar. Charming historic home, recent renovations, previous owner left unexpectedly. I don't know who will buy it next, but I do know one thing, that attic is not empty. We've all done stupid things in our youth, mate. At least, that's what I told myself while psyching myself up for the night before Julie had to leave for college. I wouldn't be the first, and certainly not the last. Not that that excused doing anything stupid, but it's what I told myself. I opened my curtains, just enough to peer out to my street corner. A solitary lamp flickering as if keeping time. Darkness had already settled over Westbridge, and my alarm clock buzzed quietly on my counter to tell me it was 9:15 on the dot. I turned my attention back to the window, seeing a car or two pass by. My house was the one at the exact loop of the cul-de-sac in the back of the neighborhood. Not hard to find but often overlooked. No sign of Julie or her electric blue car just yet. I shut the curtains. I had several makeup products stashed in my desk drawer, but was unsure which one to use for the occasion. Was sneaking into school to do a senior prank, 3 months late, a lipstick occasion, or a lip gloss one. The truth was, I didn't actually need any, and I knew that, but there would be lights everywhere for Julie to see me in. Dashboard, car, fluorescent, it all had to look right. I had to look right. Eleanor, are you all packed for Friday? My mom called from downstairs. It was past curfew, and I hadn't left the house. I probably should have been asleep, but she knew I wasn't. Not yet. I called down. I have a week. That was the thing. Why was everyone trying to rush this summer? This was possibly the only summer I'd ever have in my life where I was truly carefree. But that didn't seem to matter to anyone else. My friends couldn't talk about anything but college, while my mind was buzzing with all the glory of having one final summer in my hometown. After this, internships, grad school, a good paying job in a city bigger than I had ever dreamed possible. But I wasn't ready for all of that just yet. My phone buzzed on the counter. Jules, here, down Maples at me. Sorry, diable. I hastily finished my eyeshadow, put on mascara, and threw on the only black clothing item I owned, a dress I had gotten for my grandmother's funeral. My window has always had a ladder beneath it, some relic of a forgotten building project from the original owners back in the 40s. It was rickety, and I had barely ever tried it before, but it worked. Julie was different. If this ladder was hers, she'd have used it every Friday night. That was something that I admired about her miters, her unwillingness to be whatever anyone else wanted her to be. She was an A student when the time called for it, dripping with sweetness when she wanted to be, a bitch when she needed to be, the perfect daughter when the time was right, and the most insufferable daughter to have existed when it suited her. I could never quite place my feelings about her. I wasn't sure what to do with them. Like a Christmas gift from a member of your extended family you've never met. The humid air seemed to move around me when I landed on the ground with a barely audible smack. And the summer air was so thick, I thought I might choke on it. Cicadas put on their nightly concert. No one asked for around me. And dirt and rain and grass and the smell of someone barbecuing all mixed in the air. I ran to turn the corner, and eventually got to Maple Street, near the front of the neighborhood where my parents would never see Julie's car. My heart picked up when I hopped in the car and buckled my seatbelt. Ready? Julie asked. Absolutely. I nodded, trying not to wonder if she had noticed my makeup. She went over the plan on the way. There was a rooster on campus. No one liked. Evidently, someone had gotten tired of their pet one day and let it wander onto our high school campus. Our real mascot was a bull, but everyone knew we were actually the roosters. That rooster would end up in the principal's office for him to find in the morning. High schools apparently start earlier than most colleges. She had on rubber gloves, gripping the steering wheel. Are you scared? What? No, shut up. Put on some gloves though. We don't want the feds finding us. Weren't you going to leave a note saying who we were? Not sure. Maybe we'll just sign it, you favorite students. If her voice could drip with sweetness, it now dripped with an equal amount of sarcasm. It was true. Principal Morris was a dick. Somewhere in his 85 years on the planet, he had grown incredibly bitter. Won't that give us away, genius? Plausible deniability. Julie shrugged. By the time we had gone over everything, we were in the back parking lot of the school, the science building looming before us. Shutting the car door, I silently wondered how long this school had been around. Shrubbery was all around us, and animals called out to each other through the starless night, while Julie went through the bushes beside the building calling out for the rooster like it was a cat. I pulled out my phone and Googled how long the school had been around. 1938 apparently was the answer. Some funding from the New Deal. From what I could gather, the entire school looked like it hadn't been renovated since then. I turned to face Julie, who nearly had the rooster in her hands. Holy fuck, Julie. Stop. You're gonna get salmonella. Worth it, she said, carefully putting it in a cage she brought. I'm going to report you to PETA. I feigned judginess. Worth it, she retorted. Anything for the best senior prank ever. Why didn't we do one again? No idea. No creativity is more like it. She rolled her eyes. All they needed was a visionary. Then she laughed. At herself. At the situation. At everything. The principal's office was actually rather small compared to every other office in the administrative building. And it was on the north side of it, directly facing the gym. And we happened to know he always liked to leave his window open just a crack. Using that as leverage, we made a larger gap big enough for us to fit through. Everything was neatly situated in his office. Clean. Complete. Not a single post-it note or old textbook out of place. Shame that would be done for by the end of the night. It was quiet though. A nice kind of quiet that settled on you like a well-fitted coat. Julie broke it. Should we leave the lights on? No. Let it be a surprise. True. Okay. We're going to need to get out of here pretty quickly, because I think I just pissed this thing off. She counted down from 5, with me holding the cage and her about to release the bird. This whole thing had gone off much easier than I had thought it would. I barely registered it when she got to 1, and both of us crammed ourselves out the window into the muggy night again. In truth, we had barely seen the rooster itself. We were out as quickly as we were in. That was when we heard the music coming from the gym down the stone path. With nowhere else to go, and no one to contain our curiosity, we decided to go down to the gym. The gym was an old concrete rectangle that looked less friendly the more you stared at it. It was imposing, giant, and probably the thing people recognized most about our high school. As we got closer, we heard the sounds of camaraderie and chatter. Peeking through the glass doors of the newly renovated gym, there was finally a new floor on the basketball court. The last one had apparently been built in 1956, according to a sign about the construction outside. We were greeted with purple and blue streamers everywhere, and a group of old people looking way more buzzed than anyone would have expected them to be. A banner behind them read, "Welcome back, class of 1955. A 70-year reunion is crazy," Julie said, especially at 11 p.m. "Let's go in." What? Why? I mean, we're here, aren't we? Why not? Something was off about the whole thing, but I couldn't place it. Yearbook photos were plastered along the wall, and someone released a bunch of balloons from the ceiling. People were dancing, laughing, but something wasn't right, and I felt it in my bones. I continued to scan the scene for any type of red flag, but Julie completely disregarded me. "All right, I'm going in. See you soon." She threw open the doors of the gym we had barely been inside in our 4 years at the school, and I was left by the door trying to decipher my feelings. Like so many school dances before, I ignored her and I looked back around the gym from the window. Everything theoretically looked normal, but I couldn't shake an ever-present feeling of terror. I decided to walk around the building, trying to get a better view from the window on the east side of it. Nothing different there. Still the same people, laughing and dancing. Some with walkers, but not many. Some hit by the cordettes was playing as a couple people shuffled over to get the orange punch from the desert table set up in the middle of the room. My phone got spotty service near the gym, but it nonetheless returned my Google search for my high school's calendar. There was a class of 75 reunion on the calendar for Friday night at 5. But before then, nothing, just regular school hours. That was enough for me. I was dreaming. Or we somehow had the wrong school. Or somehow we had taken some hallucinogenic drug I didn't know about. I walked in cautiously, staying near the wall and trying not to make a scene as the music became louder and the lights brighter. I heard bits and pieces of conversation as I passed by. That's what Martha said. Now I don't know how much I believe her after the stunt she pulled sophomore year. We look pretty good for a bunch of 90-year-olds. Are you still on that? Ruth, that was literally 70 years ago. Let it go. Ice shooting through my veins. I realized I had lost Julie. My eyes darted across the darkened room as a voice came over the gym's PA system. Alrighty. Lovebirds. This one's for you. You and your Earth Angels. The penguins blared loudly through the speakers as I tried to see at least one of two things. Julie, and whoever had made that announcement, because no one was holding a microphone. I remained largely unnoticed as couples gathered up on the dance floor in their best 1950s attire. Finally, in the corner of my eye, I spotted Julie talking to someone near the pretzels on the center table. Moonlight bounced through the windows and into her eyes, shining bright as ever. Weirdly, the person she was talking to seemed to look closer to our age. I tried to catch her attention, but not before I felt an icy chill down on my shoulder. Someone had tapped me. I turned around to find a blonde teenager who looked to be about my own age standing in front of me, wearing an old cheerleading uniform. She had a gash along the length of her stomach, clearly visible through the uniform. Are you okay? Do you need help? Me. No. I'm long past the time for help. I came to help you. You need to get out of here. I can't explain it to you now, but you need to get out. No. What? I can't. My friend's over there. My tongue caught on the word friend, like my body rejected it. Look at her. Really look at her. I didn't know what was happening, but I certainly wasn't in the position to ignore demands from someone who seemed like they knew much more about what was happening than me. So I did. In the time I had taken my eyes off her, Julie looked like she had aged a few years, and she was wearing different clothes, older clothes. She looks like, I'm sorry. Who the hell are you? Eileen. Class of 94. But that doesn't matter right now. Get yourself out while you can. What is happening? God. I have to spell it out every time. Every time. Look. Just get out and look up the class of 1955. And then me. If you feel like it. But get out now. I hesitated, looking back at Julie again. I couldn't leave her. No. Actually, that makes it sound like there was no choice that night. But there was. There was a choice, and I wouldn't leave her. I ran into the middle of the floor and grabbed the almost unrecognizable now middle-aged woman away from the dance floor and out the door. Was it just my imagination, or were all their eyes now on me? Shivers ran down my heart, and through my veins, down to every crevice in my body. Eileen nodded at me as I pulled her out the door and towards the science building. What are you doing? Julie protested as I half walked, half ran towards her car and shoved her in the passenger seat. I'm not even sure. I threw the car in reverse and peeled out of the parking lot before any other strange shit could happen. Whatever transformation I had seen in Julie seemed to be slowly reversing itself the further away we drove from the campus. I didn't stop until I reached the Waffle House on the other side of town, the only place I knew would be open. I parked the car and took the deepest breath I'd ever taken in my life. Julie was still looking at me like I was crazy. I pulled out my phone. I took Eileen's advice, but I tried her first. I googled Eileen Westbridge High School, 94. I clicked on the first article I saw. Westbridge mourns the loss of beloved town icon. Eileen Matherly, March 18, 1994. Eileen Matherly, 17, was found dead on the campus of Westbridge High School yesterday, March 17th. The police have neglected to share much information about the case this soon, but have mentioned she was found in the women's locker room in the gymnasium of the school with a chainsaw wound in her stomach. Authorities suspect the time of death was around 12:15 p.m. Police are looking into suspects in the case, which could possibly include Matherly's ex-boyfriend Kyle. Eileen was such a good kid, Sarah Evans, her calculus teacher said. Really helpful around school too. That's why she wanted to become a cheerleader in the first place. We will update as more information comes, but for now, we at TV20 would like to share our deepest condolences for everyone that knew Eileen. My eyes widened, and I felt my muscles stiffen, my hands shaking. I googled Westbridge High School class of 1955. Inside Westbridge, 1955. The unspoken tragedy that defined a generation. September 19, 2012. Ask anyone from Westbridge who grew up anytime around 1955, and they will tell you that the events of January 9, 1955, were nothing special. Very powerful people have worked very hard to cover up a horrific tragedy that happened right under their noses, but evidence exists that it happened, and the names of the class of 1955 cannot be ignored. There have been so many speculations about what really happened since then. But what actually happened that day, and why did it happen? Let's look at the facts. At 1 o'clock on September 19, 1955, all seniors in the school went to the gym for a mandatory pep rally. By 1:15, all any outsiders knew was that the building itself had collapsed, leaving no survivors and no members of the class of 1955 at Westbridge High School, with 7 teachers dead. The number often changes, going up every time someone does more research into the incident. Those are the objective facts. Some suspect foul play. Some suspected a Russian bomb, or worse, a Cold War experiment gone completely awry. Some have gone completely off the deep end with supernatural theories. All we have to piece what really happened together are police reports and eyewitness accounts. At 1:17, a call was made to the Westbridge police from a student out with a hall pass, Janet Olson. The report reads as follows. Hello? I'm at Westbridge High School, and I think our gym just collapsed. The seniors were doing a pep rally in there. I don't know what police would find later. Chilling. No bodies, no nothing. Not even a hint of a suggestion that the class of 55, or the gym, ever existed, except for what remained in the memories of the classes after them. I stopped reading. I took Julie inside to get some coffee, but I made mine decaf. I still can't stop shaking. My name is Sarah Jan. Fictitious name, but my friends all call me Sarah. I turned 18 last summer, and started going out to bars in Montreal. A detail that may seem trivial, but it may have been important. I have red hair. Before this weekend, nothing had happened to me. To this day, I still wonder who it was. In early November, my friend, we'll call her Mia, and I went out to a popular club in Montreal. After we started drinking and dancing, my friend's feet hurt because of her high-heeled boots, so she sat at the bar. I went back to dancing. A boy, Antoine, approached me and offered me a drink. I accepted. I went to dance with him, but he quickly got closer and closer to me. Under the influence of alcohol, it wasn't a problem. I even agreed to give him my phone number. In the meantime, I kept an eye on my friend who was still sitting. After having only a short conversation, he offered me to go to his place. I politely declined, explaining that I didn't want to leave my friend alone. He insisted a lot, telling me over and over again that she was going to find someone to finish the night with. I refused again, but he started to pull me towards the exit. I did everything I could to get him to let go of my arm, and when he finally did, I quickly joined my friend. I whispered in her ear, "Help me," while discreetly pointing at the man in question. Luckily, she had met a group of boys. We briefly explained the situation to them. One of them, Maxime, pretended to be my boyfriend to push the other away. When the bar closed, we got to know each other better. Maxime asked me for my Snapchat. I gave it to him. As a wet ass, I absolutely had to go to the toilet. He then suggested that we go to a convenience store nearby. It was just the two of us since my friend's feet hurt too much to come with us. In the end, the convenience store was much further away than he seemed to say. When we got there were no toilets. Funny coincidence, he informed me that his car was parked right next door. He offered me a ride. Because of the alcohol, it was only then that I realized how dangerous the situation was. I had left my friend alone with strangers, and I had gone to the end of the street with someone I didn't even know. He tried to convince me, but I decided to follow my instinct and join my friend. We found a toilet and went back home. The next evening, I went to drop my friend off at her bus stop. On the way, we had to cross a park that was completely plunged into darkness. I heard someone shouting my nickname in the distance. I turned around quickly, seeing a silhouette in the darkness of the night. I just thought it was a friend. Mia told me that she had heard a man's voice instead. We stared at the person for a few seconds. Seeing that nothing was happening, we continued walking. He said Sarah again, so I quickly understood that my friend was right. It was indeed the deep voice of a man. We quickened our pace, but he was calling me more and more. In a state of panic, I realized that I had left my phone at home. So I took my friends to call my mother because there was no way I was going to take the same path on foot and risk crossing paths with him. My mother did not answer. I was completely in tears. I left him a message saying to pick me up at the bus stop. At the same time, Mia informed me that the man had left the park and was getting closer. We turned onto the street where the bus stop was. My friend had left. I was alone in the dark, not knowing what to do. I hid behind a cedar hedge, torn between watching if he was approaching, but risking that he would see me, or staying hidden. At any moment he appeared next to me. After a few minutes, I heard the screeching of tires. It was my father in a panic arriving. I was finally relieved. Trying to catch my breath, I told my father everything. We tried to find him by car, but nothing. Was he hiding in the park waiting for me to come back? I wondered who it could be. Maxime? Impossible. His location was still in Montreal. Antoine? He only had my phone number, so there was no way he knew where I was. Why did he call me Sarah and not Sarah John? I don't have any male friends who live nearby. I thought it could be one of my colleagues who looks at me intensely with a suspicious look when I work. But I realized he didn't speak French and had trouble pronouncing my name. It couldn't be him. Could it be a neighbor? Did he recognize me because of my hair color? If his intentions were not evil, why did he insist so much when he saw that I was running away? I don't know how long I have. My battery's at 14%, and I don't dare start the van. If I do, they'll hear me. I know that sounds paranoid, but you didn't see them. Or maybe you have. If you have, tell me. I need to know how to get out of here. Okay? I travel alone. I document it. My channel isn't big yet. Maybe 12,000 subscribers, but I post regularly off-grid campsites, van conversions, solo travel tips, that kind of thing. I stay out of cities, and I stay off well-worn paths. The further I am from people, the safer I feel. Or I guess I should be saying, the safer I used to feel. Tonight, I'm parked off a forest road in Idaho, miles from the nearest town. It's the kind of place where, if you screamed, no one would hear you. That's one of my go-to videos, by the way. A big scream, loud as I can, and then just the silence afterward. Basically, the place was perfect, until the knock came. A single soft knock. Not on the door, on the window. I froze. It was just after 1 a.m. The woods were silent. No wind, no animal noises. My van is unmarked. I never advertise. I'm a woman traveling alone, and I always wait and post my videos a week after I leave the spot, just to make sure no one catches on to where I'm parked. So how did someone find me, let alone creep up without setting off the motion lights? Another knock. Light. Insistent. There was no way this could be anything good, right? My heart was racing. My stomach already twisted into knots. Muscles pulled tight. I reached for my phone. My stupid fingers fumbled it, and it hit the floor mat. The thump seemed thunder loud, and when I sat back up, I nearly screamed. A child's face was pressed against the window. Pale skin, dark hair, wide, staring eyes, but something was wrong. The glass reflected weird, but there was no shine in the kid's pupils, just black, completely black. I choked on my breath. Every instinct in me screamed wrong, wrong, wrong. Why was there a child out here? I was so far away from any of the main roads. It wasn't the kind of place children would be. The kid didn't move, didn't blink. Then, another knock. My head snapped toward the sounds, and my stomach dropped. There was a second one. A little girl this time, standing by my back doors. Same dark hair, same vacant black stare. I don't scare easy. I've slept in parking lots where guys tried breaking into my van. I've camped in places where the only sounds were coyotes circling. I'm not an adrenaline junkie, but I'm also not just starting out. But this was something else. I kept my hand low, fumbling for my knife while trying to keep my breathing steady. That sounds bad. These were just kids, right? But you don't understand. There was something wrong with them. The boy at the window finally spoke. Let us in. 3 words, no emotion, no inflection, just a flat, empty demand. I shook my head. It made all my hair stand on end. He spoke again, more persistent this time. Let us in. The girl knocked again, harder. I heard it rattle the doors. It was a childish response, but I grabbed my blanket and pulled it up over my shoulders, cowering beneath the heavy cotton like it was a shield. I clutched my knife so tightly, it made my knuckles ache. I don't know how long I sat there, too afraid to breathe. I knew that if I opened the door, I wouldn't be able to close it again. Suddenly, they stepped back. The dark of night engulfed the windows again. I barely had time to process that relief before a new sound nearly made me scream. A tap on the driver's side. I whipped around. There was a third child, a new one. This kid was a little taller. He was maybe 12 at the oldest, standing inches from my driver's side door. Unlike the other two, he was grinning. The handle jerked, but I kept my doors closed so it didn't open. The grin widened. Let us in. The same 3 words again. It wasn't a question, it was a demand. I don't remember grabbing my keys, but suddenly they were in my hand. I flipped the ignition. The dashboard lit up. My heart slammed. If I had to, I'd run them over. But the engine didn't start. I turned the key again. Nothing. Nothing. The battery was fine. Just was full. It had started just fine this afternoon. But right now, the van wasn't starting. And the kids, they were still standing there, staring, smiling. I reached for my phone, fingers shaking. No service. Then the tapping started again. Every window, every door, a slow measured rhythm. Knock, knock, knock. I must have blacked out at some point, because the next thing I knew, the van was filled with light, sunlight. I woke up still clutching my knife. My doors were locked. My keys were still in the ignition. My phone was in my lap, battery at 23%. I risked a glance outside, but there was no sign of the kids. I opened the driver's side door, heart hammering. The air smelled like damp earth, pine. A beautiful misty morning. My tires were untouched. There were no footprints in the loamy soil. It was like they'd never been there at all. But they were. I know they were. And I know they're still out there too. Because my van still won't start. And I'm worried that tonight, the knock will come again. I found the glasses yesterday in the depths of my closet. Spring cleaning. I thought back to when I first saw them. I was 12 when I found the magazine ad, X-ray specs. You know, the gimmicky plastic glasses that promised the ability to see through walls and, more importantly, clothes. I spent 3 weeks' allowance on a chance to glimpse a stray nipple. 6 weeks later, an eternity in kid time. They arrived. I lined up my little brother Nicky and my sticky next-door neighbor Matt in the clubhouse out back. After swearing them to secrecy and reciting the Pledge of Allegiance, don't ask me why. Kids are strange beasts. I laid the goods on the table with a flourish. They're made of cardboard. Matt grumbled. Doesn't matter, as long as they work, I retorted. Nicky sheepishly inched towards the spectacles, eyes ablaze with curiosity. I still don't know what made me so gracious that day. I was not a kind child. not known for sharing voluntarily. But that afternoon I felt magnanimous. To this day, it is my biggest regret. You try him first. He accepted the offering with a cheesy smile, the front 2 teeth missing. He glowed at the opportunity to feel special for once. We held our breath as he lifted them to his face. Matt covered his crotch, just in case. On they slipped. He peered around the room curiously, wide-set frames nearly sliding off his freckled nose. Well, Matt demanded. I don't know. Everything looks normal. But then, he saw something. He jumped so high his head almost slammed the plywood roof. He spun on his heels and plowed right into us with surprising power. Whoa, whoa, I cried, trying to get a hold of him. He writhed and twisted as if he were being electrocuted. His jaw split wide open in a silent scream, saliva dripping down his chin. We wrestled the glasses off of him, his blunt nails clawing us madly. After a cup of water and some well-intentioned teasing, he was able to sit still. What's the matter, Nikki? What did you see? I implored. He couldn't muster an answer, only gulped down air greedily. He's just pretending for attention. Let me try, Matt cried, reaching for the spectacles. No, Nikki wailed, and lunged for them desperately. He was like a wild animal, thrashing and wailing and snapping. I'm not proud of this, but it felt so necessary at the time. Almost the responsible thing to do. He would have crushed them, and I couldn't let that happen. Not before trying them on first. We tied poor Nicky to the rickety folding chair in the corner and shoved a sock in his mouth to keep him quiet. It was the only way I thought at the time. After a drum roll, and ignoring my brother's stifled sobs, I ceremoniously slid the glasses over my face. Nicky was right. Everything looked normal. If only that were true. You can move your hand, Matt. These stupid things don't work. I whined, disillusioned with my purchase. Muzzled by the sock, Nicky wailed, tears streaking his ruddy face. He squirmed so violently that the folding chair tipped, and then came that sickening crack. We didn't react at first. To rush to him would make it real. Admit that this horrible moment warranted panic. But at that eternal stomach-churning juncture, through those god-forsaken lenses, I saw it. It straddled Nicky's limp body, jerking in sharp, violent bursts. Its bloated form looked wrong. Inside out, the dripping meaty flesh hung loosely on a gnarled, stilted skeleton, jiggling with each perverse twitch. My blood chilled, stomach coiled, mouth drained. I pissed myself like an animal. I just couldn't help it. That condemned thing lurched to a halt suddenly, like it sensed someone watching. God, I wish I had taken those goddamn glasses off. I did not see it move. It was too fast for that. In one moment, it was crouched over Nicky, and in the next, it was a sheer inch from my face. Its unblinking eyes drank me in, brimming with hunger. Each tooth was nauseatingly human, white and straight with no lips to hide behind. Its jaw snapped and shuddered at a revoltingly fast pace. Was it talking, laughing? But I was relieved of that hellish sight. The glasses ripped from my face in an instant. Matt replaced the creature, flushed and panting. What is wrong with you? Go get your mom. Did you hear me? Go get her, he pleaded. Was he crying? Why was he? Then, I remembered. Poor Nicky rested in a pool of blood. He looked so small, so young, his soft cheeks smashed against the splintery plywood floor. He lived, but he was never quite the same. My gentle, shy little brother was gone, hollowed out and occupied by something cruel, inhuman. At 11, Nicky found a dead rabbit in the backyard. He held it by its matted ears, inspecting too intently. Weeks later, I found what was left of it under his bed, rotting, broken. At 17, he ran over our family cat. He consoled our tearful mother with a callous shrug. It should have moved. Deep down, I knew that he never even hit the brakes. At 23, his girlfriend showed up at our door before dawn. She begged me to grab her wallet from his room without waking him. She tugged her sleeves down, but I glimpsed the rope burns. I don't see her around anymore. I hope she's doing okay. I haven't spoken to him in years. Last I heard, he was living in a hunting cabin 40 miles up north. I tell myself that's a good thing, that it's better this way. I've never told anyone about what I saw that day. It would be dismissed as a trauma response, a coping mechanism. But I know what I saw. At least I think I do. Then I found these fucking glasses. They're sitting on my desk now, watching me sightlessly. I should destroy them, right? Burn them to ash. Maybe I'd sleep better if I did. But then I'll never know if that thing is really gone. Sometimes I swear I can still feel it, right where I saw it last, twitching and trembling an inch from my face. After all these years, I just need to know. What's the harm in one little peek? I should have listened to the old man at the gas station. My car was running low on fuel, and I had been driving for hours through the winding backroads of Appalachia, the kind of roads that don't show up on GPS. I pulled into the station, a rickety wooden building with a single flickering neon sign, and was greeted by a gaunt man in his 70s, his eyes sunken, his skin like parchment stretched too thin over brittle bones. "You're heading up into the hills this late?" he asked, his voice a rasp, thick with warning. I nodded, pretending not to notice the way his fingers trembled as he took my cash. "If you're smart, you won't stop for nothing. You see anything strange, you keep driving, no matter what." His warning rattled me more than I wanted to admit, but exhaustion was setting in, and I still had another hour before I reached my cousin's cabin. The road was an endless ribbon of blackness, the trees pressing in on either side, gnarled branches clawing at the sky. The only sound was the hum of my engine, and the occasional distant call of an owl. Then I saw it, a figure on the side of the road. At first I thought it was a deer, but as I got closer, I saw it was a man. He stood just outside the reach of my headlights, unnaturally still, his limbs too long, his skin almost colorless under the cold light of the moon. His face was wrong, blurred, like looking at a reflection in disturbed water. I gripped the wheel tighter, the old man's warning replaying in my head. "Do not stop for anything." I hit the gas. As I passed him, my headlights briefly illuminated his face. No eyes, no mouth, just smooth, empty skin where his features should have been. My blood turned to ice. I pressed my foot down harder, the engine roaring as my car shot forward. I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror. My knuckles were white on the wheel, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I kept my eyes on the road, refusing to acknowledge the fear clawing up my throat. Then my radio crackled. At first, just static. Then something else. A whisper. "Stop." The voice was barely more than a breath, but it sent a shiver down my spine. The radio cut out. Then came the knocking. It started soft, almost polite. A tap 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 against my window. I didn't look. I couldn't. The knocks grew louder, more insistent. Then came the sound of something scraping against the glass. Nails, or claws. My heart pounded. I pressed the gas harder. The road twisted through the trees, and my headlights barely pierced the darkness. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it. A shape in the trees, keeping pace with my car. Running. No gliding. Just beyond the tree line. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel it watching me. Then the road curved sharply, and my tires skidded on the loose gravel. My car spun. I yanked the wheel, fighting for control, but it was too late. The world tilted, and I felt the sickening drop as my car careened off the road, crashing into the trees. Silence. For a moment, all I could hear was my own ragged breathing. My head throbbed, and I tasted blood. The windshield was cracked, the engine sputtering, the headlights flickered, casting weak, dying beams into the trees. Then I heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, getting closer. I fumbled with my seatbelt, my fingers slick with sweat. My pulse hammered as I reached for the door handle, my every instinct screaming at me to run. The footsteps stopped, right outside my window. I turned my head. The hollow man was there. His blank face was inches from the glass, his head tilted as if studying me. Then slowly, impossibly, his skin began to shift. Features bubbled to the surface. My features. He was stealing my face. Panic surged through me. I threw my weight against the door, bursting into the cold night air. My legs trembled beneath me, but I forced myself to move. The trees loomed around me, their skeletal branches reaching for me like grasping fingers. Behind me, the sound of metal groaning, my car being torn apart. I ran. Branches tore at my clothes, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The forest was a labyrinth, the trees pressing closer, the darkness suffocating. But I couldn't stop, not when I could hear it behind me. Not when I could hear it whispering in my voice. Stop. The ground suddenly vanished beneath my feet. I tumbled down a steep incline, crashing through brambles and roots before slamming onto hard-packed earth. Pain exploded through my body. I groaned, pushing myself up, and then I saw them. Rows of them, dozens of figures standing in the moonlit clearing, their faces smooth and empty. They stood in eerie silence, their heads turning in unison toward me. And then, all at once, their skin began to ripple, shift, their bodies contorted, their faces molding into copies of me. A chorus of my own voice whispered back at me, "Stop." Then they moved. I don't remember much after that. Just running, the endless maze of trees, the sound of footsteps closing in, the feeling of something cold brushing against my skin. Somehow, I made it back to the road. A pair of headlights appeared in the distance. A truck, its driver slamming on the brakes as I stumbled in front of it. He took one look at me, wild-eyed, bloodied, and hauled me into the cab without a word. I didn't look back. I don't know what I saw that night, but I know this. If you ever find yourself driving through the back roads of Appalachia, and you see a man standing on the side of the road, don't stop, no matter what. The road to Black Hollow was an empty stretch of cracked pavement, winding through miles of unbroken forest. A thin fog clung to the trees, whispering through the pines like ghosts murmuring secrets. I gripped the wheel, my knuckles aching from the cold, and stole a glance at my passenger. Ethan sat rigid, staring out the window, his face pale beneath the dull glow of the dashboard lights. He was the one who insisted we take this trip. One last adventure before winter, he'd said. But I could tell something was gnawing at him. He wasn't his usual self. The cabin we rented belonged to some distant uncle of his, abandoned for years. It was supposed to be a hunting trip, just the two of us, a weekend away from the city. But as we drove deeper into the woods, a heavy weight settled over me. Something felt off. By the time we arrived, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving only the brittle blue twilight to guide us. The cabin was exactly as I feared. Old, rotting, the front porch slanted, as if the ground beneath it had begun to swallow the structure whole. Ethan didn't hesitate. He grabbed his bag and stepped onto the porch, the wooden boards groaning beneath his weight. I hesitated, glancing back at the tree line. The fog had thickened, creeping through the trees like fingers curling around unseen prey. Then I saw it, a figure, a shape. It stood between the trees, just beyond the reach of the headlights, tall, unmoving, watching. I blinked, and it was gone. Shaking my head, I shouldered my bag and followed Ethan inside. The cabin smelled of mold and decay, the kind of damp that settles into the bones of a place long forgotten. Dust clung to every surface, disturbed only by the footprints we left in its wake. Ethan flicked on his flashlight, sweeping it across the walls. "Cozy," he muttered. "Yeah," I said, unconvinced. We dropped our gear and explored. The kitchen was useless, the cabinets filled with rusted cans and ancient mouse droppings. The bedrooms weren't much better, their windows boarded shut, suffocating the place in darkness. Then we found the trapdoor. It sat in the center of the living room floor, an iron ring embedded in the wood. Ethan knelt beside it, brushing away the dust. "No way," I said. "We're not opening that." He grinned. "Come on, man. This is like something out of a horror movie." Exactly. But he was already pulling it open. A sharp gust of air rushed past us, cold and thick with the scent of damp earth. The beam of his flashlight revealed a narrow set of wooden stairs descending into blackness. "Looks like a root cellar," he said. "Or a murder dungeon," I countered. Ethan ignored me, already making his way down. I swallowed my unease and followed. The carvings. The cellar was deeper than expected. Our footsteps echoed off the walls, the air growing colder with each step. At the bottom, the space widened into a circular room, its walls lined with old shelves, but it was what lay at the center that sent a shiver down my spine. A stone slab. Not a table. Not a workbench. A slab. Dark stains marked its surface, stains that had seeped deep into the stone. Then I noticed the carvings. They covered the walls, twisting symbols and crude depictions of something monstrous. Jagged claws, elongated limbs, gaping mouths filled with teeth. Some were scratched deep into the wood, others etched so faintly they barely caught the light. Ethan traced one of the symbols with his fingers. "These look old," he murmured. "Maybe we shouldn't touch." A sound, low guttural. It echoed from the shadows, rising from somewhere deeper within the cellar. We froze. Something moved in the darkness, a scraping sound like claws against stone. Then came the breathing, heavy, labored, as if something had been waiting. Ethan spun, his flashlight trembling in his grip. "We need to go. Now." We backed toward the stairs, moving slowly, trying not to make a sound. Then the flashlight flickered, and in that split second of darkness, something lunged. The thing that shouldn't be. I only caught a glimpse. Its shape too massive, too twisted to belong to any living thing. It crawled, its limbs bending at unnatural angles, its gaping maw lined with jagged, uneven teeth. It shrieked. I shoved Ethan up the stairs. He scrambled forward, nearly tripping. I followed, but something grabbed my ankle, cold, slimy. Its grip was wrong. I kicked, screaming as I tore myself free, my heart pounding against my ribs. Ethan reached the top and hauled me out, slamming the trapdoor shut just as the thing below slammed into it. The whole cabin shook. We didn't wait, didn't breathe, didn't think. We ran. Outside the air was sharp and bitter. But we weren't alone. The trees had changed. They loomed impossibly tall, their branches twisting like grasping fingers. Shadows moved between them, dark figures slipping through the fog. And then the whispers started, low, indistinct, voices that shouldn't exist. Ethan grabbed my arm. "We have to keep moving." We stumbled toward the truck, my hands fumbling for the keys. Behind us something howled. Not a wolf, not a coyote, something else. A shape broke through the trees, towering, its limbs contorted, its hollow eyes fixed on us. I got the door open. Ethan dove in, slamming it shut. The engine roared to life. I hit the gas. The truck skidded onto the road, tires spitting gravel. I didn't look back. I wouldn't look back. I just drove. We reached the nearest town by dawn. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us slept. Ethan wouldn't talk about it, wouldn't acknowledge it. He just packed his bags and left town. 2 days later, I stayed. And every night, I hear them. The whispers, the howls. Something followed us back, and it's waiting. I've been a trucker for over 15 years, and I thought I'd seen it all. You get used to the loneliness, the strange people at roadside diners, and the eerie quiet of driving through the night. But nothing could have prepared me for what I found on a forgotten road, deep in the Appalachian Mountains. It started with a detour. I was hauling a load from Pennsylvania down to Georgia, taking my usual route through the mountains when my GPS glitched. The screen froze for a moment before rerouting me onto a smaller highway. That wasn't unusual. I had taken detours before, especially when roadwork forced me to change course. But as I followed the suggested path, the road became narrower, winding through dense, looming trees that swallowed the daylight. It was supposed to reconnect with the highway in about 30 miles, so I kept driving. 30 miles never came. The road kept stretching on, twisting and turning through the thickening forest. My cell service dropped to 0 bars, and the further I drove, the more I felt like I had entered some place I shouldn't be. The road signs were old, so old the letters had faded into unreadable smudges. My headlights barely cut through the creeping fog that had begun to roll in. And then the town appeared. I nearly slammed on the brakes when I saw it. It wasn't on any map, but there it was. A collection of old buildings, their wooden frames leaning with age. The street was empty, lined with structures that looked like they belonged in the early 1900s. I slowed the truck and peered out the window. There were no cars, no people, nothing. The only sound was the low hum of my engine and the distant rustling of trees. Then I saw movement. A figure stood in the doorway of an old general store. An old man, dressed in ragged clothes, watching me. His face was shadowed, but I could feel his eyes on me. Then another figure appeared. A woman in an old-fashioned dress stood by a lamppost that wasn't even lit. Then another, and another. More and more people emerged from the buildings, stepping onto the cracked pavement, silent, watching. A cold wave of unease rolled through me. I wasn't supposed to be here. I pressed the gas, eager to get through the town and back onto the road. But as I passed by, something made my stomach drop. There were no power lines, no streetlights that worked, no modern signs. It was as if this town had been frozen in time, untouched for decades. Yet these people were still here. The road ahead twisted sharply, and as I rounded the bend, I saw something that made my breath catch in my throat. My own truck. It was sitting there, idling in the middle of the road. Same make, same color, same license plate. I slammed on the brakes, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was impossible. I looked in the rearview mirror, only to see the town was gone. The road behind me stretched into darkness, as if I had never passed through it at all. The people, the buildings, vanished, but my truck remained. A slow creeping dread filled me as I climbed out of the cab, my boots crunching against the gravel. I approached the identical truck with caution, my breath fogging in the cold air. The door was open, and then I saw myself sitting in the driver's seat. My own face, pale and unmoving, my own hands gripping the wheel, my own dead eyes staring blankly ahead. A sharp whisper echoed through the trees, and suddenly, the world around me flickered like a dying light bulb. The road beneath my feet felt unsteady, as if reality itself was slipping. Then, just as suddenly as it came, everything snapped back into place. The truck was gone. The town was gone. I was sitting in my cab, parked on the side of a normal highway. My GPS was working again. My phone had service, and the road ahead was clear. But I didn't move for a long time, because when I looked down at my hands, they were gripping the wheel just as they had been in that other truck. And when I glanced at the rearview mirror, for just a split second, I saw my own dead eyes staring back at me. I don't take detours anymore. I had always loved the quiet of small towns. After living in the city for years, the idea of escaping to a place where life moved slower, where the streets were empty after dark, felt like a dream. So when I found a cheap rental on the outskirts of a rural town, I didn't hesitate. It was an old farmhouse, nestled near a thick expanse of woods, with nothing but rolling fields and winding roads for miles. The isolation didn't bother me. I welcomed it. For the first month, everything was perfect. My closest neighbor was nearly a mile away, and the only sounds at night were the chirping of crickets and the occasional rustling of wind through the trees. But then, the fog came. It started one evening in late autumn. I was sitting on my porch, enjoying the crisp air, when I noticed it rolling in from the fields, thick, creeping unnaturally fast. Within minutes, the landscape had vanished beneath a dense, swirling mist. I could barely see past the steps. A strange silence settled over everything. The crickets stopped chirping. The wind died. Even the usual distant hum of night creatures was gone. It was as if the world had been swallowed whole. Then, from somewhere in the fog, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching softly against the gravel of my driveway. I froze. The footsteps stopped. I squinted into the fog, my pulse hammering in my throat. Was someone out there? I called out, my voice unnaturally loud in the quiet. Hello? No answer. Just silence. Then a shape, barely visible, standing just at the edge of where the fog thinned near the porch. Tall, motionless, watching. My skin prickled with a cold, crawling fear. The figure didn't move, didn't shift, just stood there, a dark silhouette against the swirling mist. I swallowed hard. Who's there? Nothing. And then, the footsteps started again. But this time, they were moving away, fading, disappearing into the fog. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, waiting, listening. When the fog finally lifted an hour later, there was nothing there. No footprints, no sign that anyone had been on my property at all. I told myself it had been a trick of the mist, a shadow, my own paranoia playing games with me. But deep down, I knew better, because the next night it happened again. The fog returned, thicker than before, swallowing the world in silence, and with it came the footsteps, always slow, always measured, and always stopping just before I could see who or what was making them. This continued for weeks. Some nights, the figure would appear closer, a dark outline in the mist, just at the base of my porch steps. I could feel its presence, heavy and watching, though I never saw its face. Other nights, I would wake up to the sound of something tapping on my bedroom window. I stopped going outside after dark. I stopped sitting on my porch, no matter how beautiful the evening seemed. But the worst came one night, when I made the mistake of looking out the window. The fog had rolled in as usual, dense and oppressive. I had locked every door, every window, but I still felt uneasy. Then, I heard breathing, soft, ragged, right outside my bedroom window. My stomach clenched, my hands trembled as I reached for the curtain. And then, I saw it, a face pressed against the glass, but it wasn't human. Its skin was pale, almost translucent. Its eyes, if they were eyes, were hollow, dark pits that seemed to swallow the light. Its mouth was too wide, stretching into something that resembled a grin, but wasn't. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The thing didn't blink, didn't move. It just watched me. Then, as if the fog itself had breathed, the figure dissolved, fading into the mist like it had never been there at all. That was the last night I spent in that house. I packed a bag before sunrise and left everything behind. I never went back. Months later, I looked up the history of the property, driven by a lingering curiosity I wished I had ignored. The farmhouse had been abandoned for years before I moved in. The previous tenant, gone, disappeared without a trace. Before that, the same. The only thing anyone ever reported was the fog and the figure that came with it. Watching, waiting, still out there. There are roads you don't take at night. I learned that the hard way. I was on a long drive home after visiting my sister in another state. It was late, and I was exhausted. The rhythmic hum of the tires on the pavement lulling me into a dull haze. My GPS had been guiding me along the highway for hours when suddenly the signal cut out. I groaned. No service. I knew I had to keep going straight, but after a few more miles, I saw something that hadn't been on my original route, an old exit leading to a smaller road. There was a sign, though it was so weathered, I could barely make out the words. But what I could read was a promise. Shortcut to I-89. I hesitated. My gut twisted in a way I couldn't explain, but exhaustion won. I took the exit. The road was rough, cracked and uneven, lined by towering trees that swallowed the light from my high beams. It didn't look like it had been used in years. I told myself it was fine, probably just an old highway that had been replaced. Then, the radio cut out. Static, no music, no voices, just a deep crackling hiss that filled the car. I reached to turn it off, but as my fingers brushed the knob, something flickered in the trees. A shadow, too tall, too thin. I gripped the wheel tighter and kept driving. The road stretched on, longer than it should have. 10 minutes, then 20, then 30. No signs, no turns, no end. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it again. A figure standing just beyond the trees. I slammed the gas pedal, my heart hammering. The road twisted, but there were no other exits. No way off. And then, the fog rolled in. Thick and heavy, swallowing everything. I could barely see the road ahead. I slowed down, afraid I'd drive off into the woods. And that's when I saw it. A car, parked on the side of the road, barely visible in the mist. I passed slowly, my headlights illuminating just enough to see. The driver's side door was open, no one inside. I should have kept going, but then, I saw something else. Further ahead, more cars. Old ones, rusted. Some flipped on their sides, others burned out, half buried in the overgrowth. There were at least a dozen, maybe more. Abandoned, forgotten. And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't a shortcut. It was a graveyard. I hit the gas. The fog thickened, and for a terrifying second, I thought I saw something standing in the road ahead. Tall, wrong, watching. But I didn't stop. I didn't look. I just drove. And then, I was back. The fog vanished. The old road spit me out onto a highway that looked normal. A gas station up ahead, streetlights, civilization. I pulled in, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. An old man at the counter looked up as I stumbled inside. "Everything all right?" he asked. I nodded, though I knew I didn't look all right. "That old highway, the one back there, where does it lead?" He frowned. What highway? I turned to point, but where the road had been was nothing but trees. I left that night and never looked back. But sometimes, when I drive alone on quiet roads, I swear I still hear the static. And I know it's still out there, waiting. I was driving through the backroads of Maine with my brother Dave. After a long weekend at our uncle's cabin, we'd spent the past 3 days hunting, drinking, and stoking a fire against the bitter February cold. By the time we left, the snow had started to fall hard, turning the world into a blinding white expanse. I grew up in these parts and knew the roads well, but that didn't make me feel any better. When the snow comes down this thick, even the most familiar roads can become something else entirely. We were about 20 miles from the nearest town, following a 2-lane highway that cut through a dense stretch of forest. The snowplows hadn't come through yet, and the tire tracks of the last car to pass were already disappearing beneath the fresh powder. We had the radio on, an old classic rock station struggling to stay tuned, but mostly we drove in silence, eyes locked on the road ahead. Then, out of nowhere, the fog rolled in. Not just any fog. This was dense, thick as smoke, swallowing the headlights in an instant. 1 second, I could see the winding road ahead. The next, it was like driving into the void. I slowed down to a crawl, gripping the wheel tight. Dave muttered something under his breath, but I could hear the nervousness in his voice. "This ain't right," he said, rubbing his hands together. Never seen fog come in this fast. Neither had I. We drove for what felt like an eternity, lost in that strange oppressive fog. The snow had stopped falling, but the air felt heavier, colder. The radio flickered in and out, the station crackling with bursts of static before going dead entirely. Then, the road took a sharp turn, and that's when we saw it. A figure, standing dead center in the middle of the road. I hit the brakes, and we skidded slightly on the ice before coming to a stop just a few feet away. The headlights cast a long, eerie shadow behind it. At first, I thought it was a person, maybe some poor soul caught in the storm. But the longer I stared, the less sure I became. The figure was tall, too tall, with limbs just a little too long. It wasn't wearing a coat, just a thin, tattered shirt, despite the freezing cold. "What the hell?" Dave whispered. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, head tilted slightly, watching us. I felt something deep in my gut twist in warning. Every instinct I had told me to get the hell out of there. But the road was too narrow to turn around, and I sure as hell wasn't about to step outside. Then it moved. Not like a person, not like anything I'd ever seen before. It twitched, shifting forward in sudden jerky movements, like a marionette being yanked by invisible strings. The moment it took a step toward us, Dave lost it. "Go, go, go," he yelled, slamming his hand against the dashboard. I didn't need to be told twice. I gunned it, swerving past the thing in the road. As we sped past, I caught a glimpse of its face, or what should have been a face. There were no features, just smooth pale skin stretched over bone. And those eyes, black pits, bottomless, like looking into something that had no right to exist. We tore down that road, fog whipping past us in waves. But when I glanced in the rearview mirror, the figure was gone. Just vanished. Neither of us spoke for a long time, both of us listening to the roar of the engine and the rapid thudding of our own heartbeats. Eventually, the fog began to lift, and just like that, it was gone. The road ahead was clear, the trees standing silent on either side like nothing had ever happened. It wasn't until we reached town that Dave finally spoke up. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "You saw it, right?" I nodded. There was no point in lying. We both saw it. But the strangest part, that road, the one we took through the fog, didn't exist. Not on any map, not on any GPS. We asked around, even spoke to an old-timer at the diner who'd lived there his whole life. He just shook his head, saying that no such road led through that stretch of woods. And yet, we had driven it. We never spoke of it again, never drove that way again, either. But sometimes, late at night, when the snow falls just right, I think about that thing in the fog. I think about what would have happened if we hadn't driven away. And I pray that whatever it was, never finds us again. I never used to be afraid of the rain. In fact, I used to love it. Something about the sound of it against my window, always made me feel safe, like I was wrapped in a cocoon, separate from the world outside. But that was before I saw him, before I learned that some things use the rain to hide. It started when I moved to a new town. The kind of place where streetlights barely work and the roads flood after a single storm. My new apartment was small, a little rundown, but I didn't mind. It had big windows that overlooked the street, and at night, I could sit in my chair and watch the world disappear behind sheets of falling water. That's where I was, the first night I saw him. It was late, past midnight, and the rain was coming down hard. The street below was empty, except for him, a figure standing on the sidewalk across from my building, completely still. At first, I thought he was just another late-night drunk, maybe trying to get his bearings before stumbling home. But something about him was off. The way he stood, too rigid, too calm. And the longer I watched, the more I realized something else. He wasn't wet. The rain was pouring, bouncing off cars, pooling in the streets. But he was dry. The water seemed to move around him, like he wasn't really there. A chill crawled up my spine. I leaned closer, pressing my forehead against the glass. That's when he moved. Not naturally, not the way people move. One moment he was on the sidewalk. The next, he was closer, not walking, not running, just closer. I jerked back from the window, my heart hammering. My brain struggled to make sense of it, to rationalize what I had just seen. Then my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Why did you look away? I didn't sleep that night. By morning, he was gone. I told myself it was a dream, that I had just imagined it. But the next night, when the rain came again, so did he. Same place, same stillness, same dry, untouched body in the middle of a downpour. Only this time, he was already closer. And I swear, even through the rain, I could see it. He was smiling. I closed the curtains. I didn't look again, but it didn't matter, because now, whenever it rains, I hear knocking on my window, and I don't live on the ground floor. Some houses aren't meant to be lived in. When I was a kid, there was an old farmhouse at the edge of the woods behind our neighborhood. It sat in the middle of a vast, empty field, hidden by overgrown grass and thyme. Nobody ever went near it. At least, that's what we thought. We all knew the stories. People said it had been abandoned for decades, yet every so often, someone would swear they saw a candle burning in one of the upstairs windows. Others said they heard knocking from inside, even though no one lived there. And then, there was the story of the man who went inside, a drifter, passing through town, looking for a place to sleep. He was seen walking toward the house one night, but never seen leaving. They found his bag on the front porch the next morning, unzipped, empty, but the door still locked. That should have been enough to keep us away. But kids are stupid. One summer night, my friends dared me to go inside, just for a minute, just long enough to prove nothing was there. I should have said no, but I didn't. I walked through the field, flashlight in hand, heart hammering. The grass was so tall it brushed my waist. Crickets filled the air with their endless song. And somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The house loomed ahead. Closer now, I could see how wrong it looked. The wood was warped and split, yet the windows were intact. The front door was heavy, solid, as if it had been reinforced, not to keep people out, but to keep something in. I reached for the knob. It turned. The door swung open with a low groan, revealing a hallway swallowed in darkness. The air inside was still, heavy. I stepped in. The floor creaked beneath me. The wallpaper had peeled away in strips, revealing deep gouges in the wood beneath. Scratches too big to be from any animal. I told myself I'd just take a quick look. A minute. That's all. I moved forward. I grew up in a small town where nothing ever happened. The kind of place where people left their doors unlocked at night, and the biggest event of the year was the county fair. But there was one thing, one story everyone knew, even if no one talked about it. The river, it cut through the woods just outside town, winding like a black snake beneath the trees. The current was slow, the water deep and cold, darker than ink when the moon wasn't shining. And then there was the thing. No one knew what it was. People just knew to stay away from the river at night. I never believed the stories. I thought they were just tales to scare kids. But that was before the summer I saw it for myself. It was the last week before school started, and my friends and I were bored. We were 17, reckless and stupid. The perfect combination for bad decisions. There were 4 of us. Me, Nate, Chris, and Jesse. We'd been friends since childhood. Inseparable. That night we sat around a bonfire near the woods, passing a bottle of cheap whiskey we'd stolen from Jesse's dad. Then Nate got an idea. Let's go to the river. Chris snorted. You mean the haunted river? Come on, man. It's just a story. Jesse grinned. What, you scared? Chris scoffed but didn't argue. So we went. The walk wasn't long. The trees pressed in around us as we followed the dirt path. The only light coming from our phones. The air was thick, humid, and too quiet. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just silence. The river was exactly how I remembered. Wide, slow moving. A dark mirror reflecting the moon. Mist curled along the surface, drifting lazily like breath on a cold day. Nate picked up a rock and tossed it in. The splash echoed unnaturally loud. See, he spread his arms. Nothing out here but water. Chris exhaled, clearly relieved. Then Jesse spoke. If it's just a story, why don't one of us go in? The silence stretched. We all looked at the river. The black water barely rippled. Something about it made my stomach twist. Nate, never one to back down from a challenge, pulled off his shirt. I'll do it. He stepped into the shallows. Then he waded deeper. The water swallowed him inch by inch, the mist curling around his shoulders. Dude, Chris said, that's far enough. But Nate grinned, taking another step. That's when I saw it. The pale thing, it surfaced behind him. A shape. A pale shape rising from the water without a sound. At first, I thought it was a log. Something washed downstream. Then it moved. Long fingers broke the surface, reaching. Nate, behind you. He turned, and then it grabbed him. Nate screamed. The thing yanked him under. I ran forward without thinking, my feet splashing into the water. Jesse and Chris were right behind me. Nate, the water churned violently. Bubbles rose. Something dark swirled beneath the surface. Then Nate's head shot back up. His eyes were wild. His mouth opened, but only bubbles came out. We grabbed him, pulled with everything we had. The thing wouldn't let go. I saw its hand, if you could call it that. Long bone-white fingers wrapped around Nate's ankle. Too many fingers, bending in ways they shouldn't. Then suddenly, it let go. Nate fell into us, gasping, coughing up river water. We dragged him to shore. He was shivering, his skin cold. But what scared me the most was his face. He looked wrong. We ran back to town, half carrying Nate the whole way. His clothes were soaked, his lips too pale. He didn't speak, just stared straight ahead. Back at Jesse's house, we turned on the lights. That's when we saw it. A handprint, stained into Nate's ankle, like a bruise. But it wasn't blue or purple. It was black, like ink, like tar. I touched it. It was ice cold. Nate flinched but didn't say anything. We begged him to go to the hospital. He refused, said he was fine, said we should all just go home and forget about it. So we did. And that was the last normal night any of us ever had. The next day, Nate didn't answer his phone. By the second day, we were worried. By the third, his mom called us. Nate's sick, she said. Her voice was wrong. He won't come out of his room. We went to see him. His blinds were shut. The air was thick, humid like standing water. And Nate was in his bed, shivering. Sweat dripped down his forehead. His skin was paler than I'd ever seen. And the mark on his ankle had spread. It wasn't a handprint anymore. It had grown. Black veins crawled up his leg, pulsing beneath his skin. We begged him to get help. He refused. I can still hear it, he whispered.
It's calling me!
That night, he disappeared. His mom called us, frantic. His bed was empty. The window was open. We knew where he'd gone. Back to the river. We searched for hours, calling his name, our voices swallowed by the mist. Then Jesse spotted footprints in the mud. Bare footprints, leading straight into the water. No sign of him coming back out. We never found Nate. The river still calls people. Said he drowned. A tragic accident. But we knew better. The thing in the river took him. And the worst part, sometimes, when I drive past the water late at night, I swear I see a figure standing in the shallows, not moving, just watching, and I know it's waiting for me too. The road stretched endlessly before me, a narrow vein of cracked asphalt cutting through the heart of the forest. I was heading home after a long day, the kind that drains the soul more than the body. The trees flanking either side of the road swayed gently under the whisper of the wind, their skeletal branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. The headlights of my car carved a tunnel of light through the darkness, but beyond that, the woods swallowed everything whole. Then I saw it. A figure standing on the side of the road. I barely had time to react before I was upon it, but in that fraction of a second, I registered the details. A man or something shaped like one, impossibly tall and draped in tattered, wet clothing. His face was obscured beneath a hood, but I could see the gleam of two pale eyes, watching, waiting. I slammed on the brakes, my pulse hammering in my ears. The car skidded slightly before coming to a stop. My breath came in ragged gasps as I peered into the rearview mirror. The road behind me was empty. No sign of the figure. With trembling hands, I exhaled and convinced myself I had imagined it. Maybe fatigue was playing tricks on my mind. I eased off the brake and pressed the gas, determined to put distance between myself and whatever my mind had conjured. Then my radio crackled to life. The station I had been listening to, soft static and occasional snippets of an old country song, warped into something else. A voice, faint, garbled. I couldn't make out the words, but it sent a shiver down my spine. The hair on my arms stood on end as the voice grew clearer, slipping through the speakers in a whisper. "You should not have stopped." A chill flooded my veins. I turned the dial frantically, but the voice remained, louder, more insistent. "Keep driving. Do not look back." I swallowed hard, my eyes flicking to the rearview mirror again. He was there, closer now, standing directly behind my car, inches from the bumper, his head tilted at an unnatural angle, as if studying me. I could feel his gaze searing into me, even through the glass. Panic surged through my body. I floored the gas, tires squealing as my car shot forward. The trees blurred past me, my knuckles white as I gripped the steering wheel. The road twisted and turned, but I barely registered the motion. I just needed to get away. Then the lights flickered, the dashboard dimmed, the headlights sputtering as if struggling against an unseen force. The engine coughed, choked. My heart lurched as the car jerked violently, then shuddered to a stop. Darkness swallowed me whole. The only sound was my own ragged breathing. I fumbled for my phone, but the screen remained black. The radio crackled again, the voice returning. "You stopped again." I barely had time to scream before a shadow passed across the windshield. A hand, elongated and with too many fingers, pressed against the glass. The skin was slick, almost translucent, the veins beneath pulsing with something dark. My breath hitched as the fingers curled, nails scratching against the surface with an agonizing slowness. Then the whisper came again, this time from outside the car. "Let me in." I clamped a hand over my mouth, squeezing my eyes shut. "This isn't real. This isn't real." A sharp tap against the driver's side window. Then another. My pulse pounded so hard I thought my ribs might crack. The whisper grew more insistent, surrounding me, echoing in my skull. "Let me in." I bit down on my lip hard enough to draw blood, willing myself not to move, not to breathe. The tapping ceased. Silence. A thick, oppressive stillness settled over everything. The air so heavy it felt like it was pressing down on me. Then the whisper returned, inches from my ear. Too late. The last thing I remember is the car door creaking open, despite my hands gripping the lock. A rush of cold air, and the sensation of something impossibly strong pulling me into the dark. I woke up in my car the next morning, engine purring softly, headlights still beaming down the empty road. My body ached as if I had been dragged through the woods. My clothes were damp, my hands raw and scraped. I checked my phone. It was 7:13 a.m. I had been missing for over 6 hours. The road behind me was empty, the forest still, but I knew, deep down, that I hadn't been alone. I never take that road anymore. And when the radio crackles to life, whispering in a voice not my own, I turn it off. I don't stop, and I don't look back. I was heading back into town with my buddy Joe, after spending the weekend out on a frozen lake, ice fishing and drinking beer. The fish were really biting too. Joe's SUV was stuffed to the gills with walleye and smallmouth bass. The northerly town of Kapuskasing was buried under a mountain of snow, the worst snowfall since the winter of '97. I've lived my entire life in northern Ontario, so I've seen my fair share of snow, but nothing like this. But you learn to expect the unexpected in northern Ontario. We were heading over a steep incline, enjoying a generous backdrop of pine trees painted in freshly fallen snow, when tragedy struck. We watched as 2 police helicopters landed on the small slice of highway, causing the trickles of traffic to grind to a halt. Not a good sign. This highway was the only road home. We later learned that a newlywed couple had collided with a transport truck, killing both the husband and wife. We were forced to turn around and head back over the hill, where we found ourselves driving through a modest-sized hamlet, consisting of 1 stop sign, a gas station / motel / restaurant, plus a smattering of wartime houses, except all you could see was the pointed rooftops. The houses were completely submerged in snow. It was an incredible sight, something you only see this far up north. And even then, this was rare. Joe didn't want to stick around, waiting a good 12 hours for the road to clear. He had a wife and kids to get home to, so we pulled over, wondering what our next move should be. Joe had that look in his eye. The look he gets when he's about to do something dangerous or stupid, or both. I know this look well. Hand tight, he said. And hold on. We turned onto a crude version of a road, the kind designated for snowmobiles, with stop signs standing a mere 3 feet tall. The road was extremely narrow. Snowbanks as high as trees were towering over us like large looming walls of white. If anything were to approach, we'd have nowhere to go. There wasn't enough room to turn around. I was becoming increasingly uneasy. This is how people get hurt, or worse. Are you sure this is safe? I asked, hating the sound of my voice. Joe ignored me, or simply didn't hear me. He was busy white-knuckling the minivan through the snow-tunneled trail, the glare of the setting sun blinding us the entire time. We drove for 15 minutes, knifing our way along the icy road, which was bumpier than a wooden roller coaster. It was obvious that we shouldn't be here. The impending darkness didn't improve my mood one bit, either. I had a bad feeling about this. Joe stopped the van. "What's up?" I asked, not trusting the look on his face. Joe didn't answer. I could see his mind at work, assessing the direness of our situation. "I've got to turn this thing around somehow," he finally said. I couldn't see how this was possible. As we were sandwiched between 2 colossal snowbanks, something flickered inside Joe's dark eyes. "What's that up ahead?" he asked, flashing on the high beams. "I think it's a road." It was. We edged a bit further, stopping at this makeshift road. There were no signs or road markings to be seen. Nothing. In fact, this road looked worse than the one we were on. "Let's see where it goes," Joe said, cranking the wheel. As the minivan lumbered down the unmarked road, an ominous feeling swept over me. It was impossible to ignore. We were in trouble. There was no denying it. We were completely off the grid. Not even Google Maps could save us. There was only one way to go. Straight. The road was leading us into the dark of the forest, and when you're this far north, that's never a good idea, especially at night. That's when the wolves come out. It was looking to be a moonless night, which didn't help us one bit. Joe's hands were quivering as he clenched the wheel, keeping us from skidding into the towering snowbank. He kept assuring me we'd be all right, but I've heard that one before. Joe slammed on the brakes. "You see that?" he pointed. "Over there." I squinted my eyes. "Look," he said. "Fire." Deep into the forest I spotted a small flickering flame, dancing blue and orange and yellow and wild, probably a campfire. Just then, a strange and disturbing sound crackled through the night, like a howling wolf. "You hear that?" he asked. The animal cried out again. It was the loneliest yowl I'd ever heard. There it goes again. It sounded like a wolf, except it didn't sound like any wolf I'd heard before, and I've heard plenty. Whatever it was dangerously close. "Wolf," I said nervously, but not believing it. As soon as those words left my mouth, a pair of glowing red eyes appeared out of nowhere. Joe stopped the car and killed the lights. "Be still," he said. I did just that. I sat motionless beside him in the car, but my hands were shaking. Those laser-red eyes were approaching at an impossible speed. "Reach back and grab the gun," Joe whispered. I tried, but it was out of reach. They were on his side, closer to the back. Those glowing eyes flashed on and off, and for a moment everything was still. Then, from out of nowhere, the beast lunged onto the hood of the van. "Ah! H! We screamed in unison. The thing was huge, unlike any animal I'd ever seen. It looked like an overgrown German shepherd, except it was standing on its hind legs, like a human. It was snarling at us, making ungodly noises, thrashing about. The creature was long and gangly, frothing at the mouth, clearly rabid. "Dogman," Joe said, clearly astonished. "I don't believe it." Joe gunned it, looking to run the thing over and speed away. But the wheels were caught on ice. Without warning, the beast leapt off the hood and started scratching at my door, its claws like daggers tearing the door from its hinges. It smashed through the windshield, shattering it into a million pieces. With its dog-like face twisted in rage, the thing took a swipe at me, its long, toothy claws just inches from ripping my eyeballs from their sockets. The SUV shook, spilling the cooler of dead fish. The smell was atrocious. The dogman disagreed. Before it could rip apart my throat with its curvy claws, the creature turned from me and trampled to the back of the van, where it devouring the fish in seconds flat. Its muzzle turned blood red. Watching it lick the fish guts from its paws was sickening. This isn't how I wanted to die. The dogman's razor-sharp teeth were on full display. The insidious brute seemed hell-bent on killing us both. We were, in fact, the main course. It took a tentative step toward us, licking its filthy face. I gave Joe a look that said, "Nice knowing you, pal," when out of nowhere came an ear-ringing blast, striking the creature in the shoulder. The thing screamed in protest. Then came another shot, hitting the beast square in the chest. Blood and gore spilled like wine across the interior of the SUV. "Someone's shooting at it," Joe proclaimed. 3 more shots rang out. The creature snarled, wiped the fleshy cartilage from its bloodied face, then attacked. Bang! The shot went wide, but it was enough to send the beast scurrying back into the woods. "Holy hell," Joe said, in a shaky voice. Without a second thought, he pulled his seat back as far as it could go, then shimmied his way into the back of the van and grabbed the gun. "We're gonna need this." All of a sudden, it was freezing, with the vehicle off and the windshield busted in. It was an igloo inside the van. "It's getting cold in here, eh?" I said, shaking uncontrollably. A large plume of steam escaped from my face as I spoke. I was in shock. I had no idea what that thing was, but it damn near killed me. The scene inside of the minivan was that out of a horror movie. The smell was even worse. I tried opening the door, but it wouldn't budge. Joe tried his door with the same results. We were stuck. I'd slice myself to shreds before I got halfway through my windshield. Joe's door had a bullet hole where the handle should be. We'd have to escape through the back. Blood and guts and fish bones and all. It was gruesome, but we did it. Once outside, I scanned the area, searching for that dog creature that almost killed me. But it had vanished. Joe's shotgun was aimed at a speck of light approaching from straight ahead. A car. Within minutes, we were greeted by a Volkswagen microbus. It stopped directly in front of us. The driver got out and ran toward us carrying a sniper rifle. Wearing a belt of ammunition, he spoke fast and with purpose, checking his surrounding while doing so. "You saw it? You did, didn't you? Excellent. Which way'd it go, by the way?" This guy made Clint Eastwood look like a Boy Scout. I honestly thought he was going to kill us. He frowned as he surveyed the scene. Then he shrugged. "I suppose you'll be needing my help." He ran to the bus and opened up the hatch, exposing an array of military-style weapons to the likes I'd only seen in the movies. "Holy hell," Joe said, clearly impressed. I remained quiet, unsure what to make of this heavily armed red-headed stranger, who literally just appeared out of nowhere to save our lives. But there seemed to be no other choice. Whoever he was, he drove us back to his cottage, regaling us with the history of this dogman creature. He told us some pretty tall tales. His name was Patrick. Apparently, he's a dogman hunter. He says he's never captured one, but claims to have seen 4 or 5, wounding 2 of them. Pesky bastards, he says, hard to kill. He'd been hunting the one that attacked us for weeks. Apparently, it's been mutilating deer and coyotes, as well as regular cats and dogs all winter long, leaving their salvage remains scattered along the sides of the road and in people's backyards. The locals were starting to panic. Joe and I texted home. Then we stayed up all night talking about Dogman. I was having a hard time coming to grips with all this, seeing as how I almost died at the hands of one of them. Joe, on the other hand, was enthralled. The next day we drove back to the SUV to inspect the damage. When we arrived, the van was completely dismantled and destroyed. It lay in ruins. Everything inside it had been ravaged and plundered. "This isn't right," Patrick said. "There must be an explanation." We scanned the surrounding area for over an hour and came up empty-handed. A fresh blanket of snow had fallen overnight, making track finding next to impossible. The disappointment on Patrick's face was palpable. Reluctantly, we hopped into his microbus, and he drove us home with our tails between our legs, where we arrived a day late and short one SUV. We stayed in touch with Patrick going forward. Joe, coming from a long lineage of seasoned hunters, was intrigued by this dogman creature. Naturally, I was skeptical. I'm fairly certain that beast meant to eat me. The last thing I wanted to do was volunteer to go searching for it. Yet, unbeknownst to me, this was the making of a team of hunters, dogman hunters. Still, amidst all the excitement, a feeling of trepidation had stolen over me. There was lesson to be learned from all of this, a lesson lost on my gun-toting counterparts. Some roads are best untraveled, especially in northern Ontario, where anything can happen, and usually does. The town of Ash Hollow had been abandoned for decades, swallowed by time and the encroaching wilderness. People spoke of it only in hushed tones, calling it cursed, a place where the land itself had turned against its people. But to Nathan, a photographer chasing urban legends, it was a goldmine of untouched history. He wanted to capture its eerie beauty, to document the remnants of a place where life had simply ceased to be. The drive out was long and desolate. The main roads had long since crumbled, leaving behind a winding dirt path flanked by skeletal trees. The closer he got, the more the woods seemed to thicken, twisting in on themselves as if conspiring to keep trespassers out. His GPS had given up miles ago, leaving him to navigate by instinct and the faded map he had printed the night before. By the time he reached the outskirts of Ash Hollow, the sun was already beginning to sink behind the trees, casting the sky in hues of blood orange and deep indigo. He parked beside the first building he saw, a collapsed church, its steeple buried beneath rotting beams. The stained glass windows were shattered, leaving jagged teeth of colored glass in their frames. The wind whispered through the wreckage, carrying with it the faint scent of mildew and something metallic. Nathan shivered, but chalked it up to the evening chill. He moved carefully through the streets, camera in hand, snapping photos of the decaying houses, their doors hanging open like yawning mouths. Faded curtains still clung to broken windows, fluttering with ghostly grace. He was about to step onto the porch of what must have been the town's general store, when he noticed something strange. Footprints in the dust, fresh ones. Nathan crouched down, running his fingers over the impressions. They were human, but oddly spaced. The gait uneven. Someone had been here recently, perhaps even today. He straightened, suddenly aware of how silent the town had become. No birds, no insects, only the whispering wind and his own breathing. Deciding to follow the tracks, he ventured deeper into Ash Hollow, winding through its empty streets. The footprints led him past the skeletal remains of homes and businesses, finally stopping at a large 2-story house with its windows boarded up. The door stood ajar, swaying slightly as if recently disturbed. A smart man would have turned back. Nathan was not a smart man. He stepped inside. The interior smelled of damp rot and old wood. His flashlight cut through the gloom, illuminating walls covered in peeling wallpaper. The patterns faded into near obscurity. A staircase led to the second floor, but the footprints veered toward a door beneath it. Nathan hesitated before grasping the rusted doorknob and pulling it open, stairs led down into darkness. A basement. He took a deep breath and descended, his footsteps echoing in the tight space. The air grew thick and cold, carrying a dampness that clung to his skin. His flashlight flickered, struggling against the oppressive darkness. The basement was larger than he expected, stretching into an open chamber lined with shelves cluttered with dusty jars and rusted tools. But in the center of the room, something made his breath catch. A chair, old and wooden, positioned beneath a single exposed bulb that dangled from the ceiling. Around it, the floor was dark, too dark. His flashlight caught the sheen of something wet, blood, dried and blackened, forming a grotesque pattern around the chair. His stomach twisted. He turned, ready to leave, when the sound of a slow, dragging footstep echoed from above. Nathan froze. Another step, closer, then another. He flicked off his flashlight, plunging himself into darkness, pressing his back against the cold stone wall. He held his breath as the footsteps reached the basement door. A creak. The door began to swing open. His pulse pounded in his ears. As he strained to see through the darkness, a shadow loomed in the doorway, its outline just barely visible. It stepped forward, revealing a gaunt figure wrapped in tattered cloth, its limbs unnaturally long, its fingers scraping against the wooden railing. Nathan swallowed hard, willing himself to stay silent, to stay still. The figure stepped into the room. The exposed bulb above the chair flickered to life, casting its glow over the thing's face. It had no eyes. The sockets were hollow, gaping wounds of darkness that seemed to pull in the light. Its mouth stretched impossibly wide, lips curled into a grotesque grin that revealed rows of jagged teeth. Nathan moved before he could think, bolting for the stairs, scrambling past the creature as its clawed hands lashed out. A sharp pain tore through his shoulder as one of its nails raked his skin. He didn't stop. He couldn't. He lunged for the top of the stairs, crashing through the doorway and slamming it shut behind him. The house groaned as if in protest. Footsteps thundered below, the thing giving chase. Nathan sprinted for the front door, yanking it open just as the sound of splintering wood rang out behind him. He didn't look back. Bursting into the open air, he ran toward his car, heart hammering. The moment he reached it, he threw himself inside, fumbling for the keys. The engine roared to life. In the rearview mirror, the house loomed, dark and silent. But something stood in the doorway, a shadow motionless, watching. Nathan didn't wait to see if it would follow. He tore down the abandoned road, leaving Ash Hollow in the dust, vowing never to return. But in his rearview mirror, just before the trees swallowed the town, he saw something move in the distance. It had no eyes, and it was smiling. I used to drive for a living, long hauls, night shifts, the kind of work that dulls your mind and makes time meaningless. The hours blended together, marked only by the slow, rhythmic thrum of tires on asphalt. I thought I had seen it all. Deer darting across highways, eerie patches of fog that swallowed my truck whole, even the occasional hitchhiker with dead eyes and nowhere to go. But nothing prepared me for the stretch of road known as Black Hollow. I had heard whispers about it from other truckers. Black Hollow was a back road cutting through the dense Appalachian woods, a road supposedly faster than the main highway, but avoided by all but the most desperate. It wasn't on most maps, and those who had taken it spoke of odd occurrences, vehicles losing power, strange figures appearing in the trees, and a feeling, an overwhelming sense of something watching. One cold autumn night, behind schedule and exhausted, I took Black Hollow. At first it seemed like any other back road, narrow, winding, lined with trees whose skeletal branches reached overhead to form a tunnel of shadows. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the road ahead, but revealing nothing unusual. The only sound was the steady hum of my engine, and the occasional rustling of wind through the leaves. Then, about 5 miles in, my radio cut to static. I tapped it, adjusted the dial, but it refused to work, a minor annoyance. I could drive in silence. A few minutes later, the temperature in the cab plummeted. I turned up the heat, but it did nothing. My breath fogged the windshield, and I felt an inexplicable pressure in my chest, like the air had thickened. becoming heavy and suffocating. Then I saw it. A figure, standing at the edge of the road, just barely within the reach of my high beams. Tall, emaciated, wrapped in tattered rags, its face obscured by shadow. It didn't move, just stood there, watching. As I passed, I fought the urge to look in the mirrors, to see if it had turned to follow my truck. I focused on the road ahead. Keep driving. I told myself, just keep driving. A minute later, another figure, identical. A minute after that, another, each one positioned just at the tree line, staring, waiting. The further I drove, the more I saw. They weren't moving, yet somehow they were always ahead of me. I checked my speedometer. I was going fast, too fast for any human to keep up. Then the truck sputtered. The headlights flickered. My stomach dropped as the engine coughed and stalled, leaving me coasting to a stop on that cursed road, miles from anywhere. The only illumination came from the dim glow of the dashboard and the full moon overhead. I didn't want to look outside, but I had to. They were closer now, no longer at the edge of the trees, but standing in the middle of the road, surrounding my truck. Their heads were tilted at unnatural angles, their hollow eyes locked onto me. One stepped forward, and my breath caught in my throat. It had no face. Where its eyes, nose, and mouth should have been, there was only smooth, featureless skin. And yet, I could feel it staring, feel its presence crawling over my body like cold fingers. My hands trembled as I turned the key, praying to any god that would listen. The truck roared to life. Without hesitation, I slammed my foot on the gas. The tires screeched against the asphalt as the truck lurched forward, barreling through the figures. I expected impact, the sickening crunch of bodies hitting metal. But there was nothing, just an icy wind rushing through the cab, the sensation of something passing through me. I didn't slow down. I didn't look back. I drove until I reached the highway, until the air felt normal again, until I could no longer feel their eyes on me. Only then did I risk glancing in the mirrors. They were gone. The next morning, I checked my truck. The front grille was coated in frost, ice forming strange, twisting patterns across the metal. My fuel gauge, which had been at half a tank before entering Black Hollow, was now nearly empty. I took the long way home after that. Always, even if it meant losing time, even if it meant missing a delivery. I never drove Black Hollow again, because some roads are not meant to be traveled, and some things should never be seen. The storm had rolled in faster than expected, swallowing the landscape in a dense sheet of rain. The small winding highway cut through an expanse of wilderness that stretched endlessly on either side. Trees loomed like dark figures, their outlines illuminated in brief flashes of lightning. Samuel gripped the wheel of his truck, eyes flicking between the road ahead and his fuel gauge, which hovered dangerously close to empty. He had been driving for hours, his GPS leading him on a supposed shortcut through the backwoods. But something felt off. The road signs had become increasingly worn, some riddled with bullet holes, others so faded they were impossible to read. There hadn't been another car in miles. The rain intensified, hammering against his windshield. As he rounded a bend, his headlights swept across a figure standing by the roadside. A woman. She was soaked through, her hair plastered to her face, eyes wide with a strange mixture of relief and fear. Samuel hesitated, but slowed, rolling his window down just enough to hear her over the downpour. "Please," she begged. "I need a ride." She was shivering, barefoot, dressed in a tattered white sundress. Something about her was unsettling, but he couldn't just leave her there. Against his better judgment, he unlocked the door, and she climbed in without hesitation. "Where are you headed?" he asked, glancing at her through the corner of his eye. Just down the road," she murmured, hugging herself for warmth. "Not far." He nodded and kept driving, though his unease deepened. She smelled like damp earth, like something that had been left out in the rain for far too long. When he tried to make small talk, she offered only short, cryptic answers. She kept stealing glances out the window, as if searching for something or someone. Minutes passed before she finally whispered, "You shouldn't be on this road." Samuel's fingers tightened around the wheel. "Why's that?" She hesitated. "It doesn't lead anywhere good." A cold dread settled in his chest. Before he could ask more, his headlights flickered, and his engine sputtered. The truck lurched forward before slowing to a complete stop. Samuel cursed under his breath. The fuel gauge was lower than he'd thought. He turned to the woman, but she was gone. The passenger seat was empty. Rainwater pooled where she had sat. The door hadn't opened. There had been no sound of movement, just gone. Samuel's pulse pounded in his ears. He reached for his phone, but there was no service. The only light came from the dying glow of his dashboard, and the occasional burst of lightning outside. He sat there for a moment, willing himself to think clearly. Then came the tapping, a soft rhythmic sound against his driver's side window. He turned slowly, every hair on his body standing on end. The woman was outside, but she was different now. Her eyes were hollow, black voids that seemed to stretch into nothingness. Her jaw hung open at an unnatural angle, her lips twitching as if struggling to form words. Her sundress clung to her frame, torn and caked in mud. Her fingers scraped along the glass, leaving behind streaks of something dark and viscous. Samuel fumbled for the keys, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He tried the ignition, but the truck wouldn't start. The tapping grew more insistent. Then came the whisper, though her lips didn't move. "Let me in." Samuel slammed his foot against the gas pedal. Though the truck refused to obey, the tapping turned into pounding. The whole vehicle shook as if unseen hands were pushing against it from every direction. Then silence. The storm raged on outside, but the pounding had stopped. The woman was gone again. Samuel swallowed hard, forcing himself to breathe. He needed to get out of there. Then something shifted in the rearview mirror. A shape, a shadow. It moved unnaturally, as if it were unraveling itself from the darkness. And before he could react, something cold wrapped around his throat. The last thing he saw was his own reflection in the glass, eyes wide with terror. Before the darkness swallowed him whole. When authorities found his truck days later, the driver's seat was empty. The keys were still in the ignition. The only sign of struggle was the deep gouges in the glass, as if something or someone had been desperately trying to get out. The road stretched endlessly through the heart of the Appalachian wilderness, a black ribbon swallowed by towering pines and tangled undergrowth. I had been driving for hours, chasing the dim glow of my headlights as they carved a path through the suffocating darkness. The radio had long since given out, reduced to static and distorted whispers that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. The gas station clerk had warned me about taking the old mountain road this late at night. "Strange things happen out there," he had said, his eyes shadowed beneath the brim of his cap. Best to stick to the highway. But I was in a hurry. The highway would have added another 2 hours to my trip, and I needed to get home. So I ignored his warning and took the shortcut. Somewhere around the 20th mile, a heavy fog rolled in, thick as smoke, swallowing the road and everything beyond it. I slowed down to a crawl, gripping the wheel with white-knuckled hands as I peered into the murk. The headlights barely cut through the mist, illuminating only the road directly in front of me. That was when I saw it, a figure standing in the center of the road. I slammed the brakes, tires screeching, as the car skidded to a stop just feet away. My heart hammered against my ribs as I leaned forward, trying to get a better look. It was a woman, barefoot and wearing what looked like a torn nightgown. Her long hair matted to her face. She stood perfectly still, her arms limp at her sides, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. I rolled down the window slightly. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" She didn't answer. Then she moved. "No." She twitched, a sharp jerking motion, like something was controlling her limbs. My breath hitched as she slowly lifted her head, revealing a face that was all wrong. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, her eyes sunken deep into dark hollows. And then she smiled, wide, too wide, stretching her lips far past the point of human possibility. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave. I threw the car into reverse just as she took a step forward, her movement unnatural, like a marionette with its strings yanked. The engine roared as I slammed the accelerator, the tires spinning before catching the pavement. The fog pressed against the windows, distorting the woman's shape as she kept walking, no gliding, toward me. And then she screamed. The sound was inhuman, a shriek that rattled the glass and vibrated in my skull. It wasn't just loud, it was wrong, filled with layers of voices, some high, some guttural, all clawing over each other. In a discordant symphony of agony, I almost lost control of the car, my vision blurring as I sped backward down the winding road. The fog thinned for just a moment, and I saw them, dozens of figures standing among the trees, watching. Some were barely visible, mere outlines in the mist. Others were clearer. Men, women, children, all with the same sunken eyes and unnaturally stretched smiles. The woman in the road suddenly disappeared, vanishing as if she had never been there at all. I didn't stop. I kept going, my hands shaking as I turned the car back toward the main road, no longer caring about the extra 2 hours it would take. I didn't look back, not until I reached the highway, where the fog finally lifted, revealing an empty, starless sky. I pulled over, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my fingers still gripping the wheels so tightly that my knuckles ached. The silence pressed against my ears, deafening after the chaos I had just escaped. And then I heard it, a whisper, right next to my ear. "We'll see you again." I turned, but there was nothing there, just the dark stretching endlessly into the unknown. The wind howled through the hollow remains of the town, rattling broken window panes and sending dry leaves skittering across the pavement. David adjusted his scarf and pulled his coat tighter around himself, stepping carefully over the cracked sidewalk as he made his way toward the house at the end of the street. It stood there like a specter, its weathered wooden frame sagging under the weight of time, its windows gaping like vacant eyes. He hesitated at the threshold. The stories about this place weren't just urban legends. People had disappeared here. Some claimed to have heard voices coming from inside, whispering, calling. Others swore they had seen figures moving behind the curtains. When the house had long been abandoned, David didn't believe in ghosts. He was here for answers. Pushing the door open, he stepped inside, greeted by the scent of rotting wood and something else, something foul, like damp earth and decay. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a long hallway lined with faded wallpaper peeling away in curling strips. The floor creaked beneath his boots. Then, a sound, a low, rhythmic tapping. David froze. It was coming from upstairs. His breath hitched as he turned the corner, the staircase looming before him like the throat of some great beast. The tapping continued, steady, insistent. He swallowed hard and forced himself up the steps, the old wood groaning under his weight. At the top of the stairs, a single door stood slightly ajar. Beyond it, shadows pooled in the corners, stretching and shifting in ways that made his skin crawl. He took a tentative step forward and pushed the door open wider. The tapping stopped. Silence. David's flashlight swept the room, dust-covered furniture, an old rocking chair, and Dee's stomach dropped. In the far corner, something crouched, a figure, gaunt and contorted, its back pressed against the wall, its arms too long, its fingers ending in jagged blackened nails. The head was wrong, elongated, tilted at an unnatural angle, and then it moved. David barely had time to react. Before it lunged, he stumbled back, heart hammering, but the creature was fast, too fast. It reached him before he could run, its fingers curling around his wrist like iron clamps. Cold. The touch was unbearably cold. A whisper filled his ears, not one voice but many, layered and distorted. They slithered into his mind, filling it with static, with an overwhelming sense of emptiness. Then suddenly, light. A bright, searing glow burst from the hallway, and the creature shrieked, recoiling into the darkness. David didn't wait. He wrenched free and bolted down the stairs, his lungs burning, his feet barely touching the steps. He hit the front door at full force, bursting outside into the freezing night. The wind roared around him, but nothing followed. The house stood silent once more, its windows dark, empty. David never looked back, and the next morning, when he checked the house again, the door was locked, as if no one had ever entered.